Hey there. Tonight I want to tell you a story. One that begins not in the middle of chaos, but in perfect peace. It's the story of a garden. A garden so still, so full of beauty, that it felt like the world hadn't learned how to break yet. No noise. No fear. No time ticking forward too fast. And tonight you'll walk it with me. This isn't a dream. And it's not a lecture. It's a gentle retelling, like a story whispered just before sleep. Soon the screen will fade to black, and you'll hear the rain begin to fall. But before we slip into stillness, if you love stories like this, and if you love Jesus, leave a like on this video. And drop a comment below to let me know where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing our little nighttime Bible community grow with every upload. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe and come be part of something deeper. But now, close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and walk with me into the Garden of Eden, before it was lost. The air in Eden felt different the first time you breathed it in. Not the way air feels after rain or in a quiet forest, but something deeper. It filled your lungs with the clean weight of a world that had never known pollution. No burnt gasoline, no factory smoke, just the quiet hum of earth and leaf and the faint salt of distant water. You could taste the morning mist rising from the river, the green sharpness of crushed grass underfoot, and something else. Something like the scent of wet clay before the potter shapes it. Think of how your chest tightens now when you walk past a bus exhaust or smell the heavy air before a storm. That never happened in Eden. Every breath was like the first gasp of a newborn, smooth and unlabored. Genesis says God formed Adam from the dust and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. That same breath still moved through the garden when you arrived. It carried the perfume of flowers whose names we've forgotten, the musk of soil freshly turned by a deer's hoof, and the sweetness of fruit warmed by the sun. When you exhaled, the air left your lips warmer than when it entered. It wasn't like blowing out a candle, more like releasing something back into a place that already knew it. The wind didn't rush or howl here. It moved as if it were breathing along with you, slow and even. Sometimes it paused altogether, letting the silence settle like a hand resting on your shoulder. Your modern lungs are used to working harder. In the city they fight through layers of fumes and pollen. Even in the countryside, there's always the tang of distant fires or fertilizer. But here each inhale was effortless. The oxygen reached your blood faster, as if your body remembered how it was meant to function. You noticed how your shoulders dropped without you telling them to, how your jaw unclenched. Near the riverbank, the air grew damp and thick with the scent of waterweed and the mineral bite of wet stones. Frogs sang from the reeds, their throats puffing out air that smelled of river foam and algae. You could distinguish each layer, the coolness near the water, the spice of bark heating in the sun, the faint floral note drifting from a clearing where lilies grew. Genesis tells us a mist used to rise from the earth to water the ground before rain was even necessary. You saw it happen as you walked. A soft exhalation from the soil that left the soles of your feet damp. The ground didn't bake hard here. It stayed loose and giving, releasing small sighs of warmth when you stepped on it. At noon the air grew drowsy. Bees droned through it, their wings stirring up the scent of nectar. Birds rode the updrafts without hurry, their feathers spreading to catch currents that smelled like dried grass and sky. Even the sunlight had a texture. Not the harsh glare that makes you squint now, but a golden haze that carried the weight of pollen. As evening came, the air cooled and settled. The last warmth of the day rose from the rocks by the river, mixing with the fragrance of night-blooming flowers. Fireflies flickered in the stillness, their tiny bodies leaving trails of air that tasted like summer lightning. You could lie on your back and watch the first stars appear through air so clear it felt like looking through water. Then there were the places where the air changed completely, where you knew something holy had passed. A clearing where the grass lay flattened in a pattern too large for any animal, the scent lingering like ozone after a storm. A path where the leaves rustled without wind, stirred by an absence you couldn't see but could feel on your skin. This was the air that filled Adam's chest when he woke to find God bending over him. The same air that carried Eve's laugh the first time she saw morning light through the fig leaves. It was never meant to burn your throat or make you cough. Never meant to carry the weight of smog or the metallic tinge of storm drains. You take one last deep breath before moving on, holding it as long as you can, not because the air is rare here, but because you know what comes later. You know how the world will change. But for now, in this moment, your lungs are full of Eden. The first thing you noticed was what you didn't hear. No car alarms, no sirens, no distant hum of highways. The silence didn't feel empty though. It felt full, like the quiet of a room where someone you love is breathing softly beside you. Then the garden's sounds began to separate themselves, one by one. Leaves moved with a hushed, papery whisper as they brushed against each other, not from wind, but from the trees themselves swaying in slow rhythm. The psalmist wrote about trees clapping their hands. Here they barely needed to raise their voices. Water laughed as it ran over the river rocks, clear as a child's giggle. Fish broke the surface with soft plinks, their mouths kissing the air before sliding back under. You heard their bodies ripple through the current, gentle as fingers dragging through bathwater. No frantic splashing, no panicked darting, just creatures moving through their element with perfect ease. Frogs croaked deep in their throats, not alarmed warnings to each other, but contented murmurs, sleep talk between old friends. Birds called back and forth without urgency. A warbler's trill would rise from the fig tree, and a dove would answer 3 notes lower, weaving a melody no human composer could duplicate. Their voices didn't scrape at your ears like city pigeons or the sharp cries of crows fighting over trash. These were songs sung for the joy of singing. Sometimes a whole flock would pause together, letting the garden grow still before beginning again in unison, as if following a conductor only they could see. Insects rubbed their wings in the afternoon heat, their hums settling over your skin like warm honey. Bees moved from flower to flower, their buzz steady and calm, never the frantic zipping of creatures afraid the blooms might disappear. Ants rustled through grass blades with tiny footfalls that sounded like rainfall when you knelt close. Butterflies made no sound at all, their wings slicing through air too gently to leave a mark. At dusk, the frogs near the riverbank began their night chorus. Not the uneven, competing croaks of our world, but layered harmonies rising and falling together. Their throats swelled and deflated in waves, making the riverbank itself seem alive and breathing. Fireflies blinked in time with the rhythm, their glow swelling brighter with each deep croak before fading again. In the distance, an owl called once, not the haunting cry we know now, but a rounded, mellow note that hung in the air like a struck bell. Even footsteps sounded different here. Bare feet met soil with a soft thump that sent vibrations through the ground but left no lasting mark. The earth accepted each step and sprang back, whispering against your soles. When you brushed past a bush, the leaves slipped aside without protest, their rustle more sigh than scrape. Branches bent under the weight of climbing animals but never cracked or groaned in protest. The night brought new sounds. Stars seemed to hum far overhead, a tone so high and pure most ears wouldn't catch it, but you felt it in your teeth. The moon pulled tides through hidden aquifers beneath the garden bed, making springs bubble up with tiny glugging noises. Somewhere beyond the trees, what might have been a lion sighed in its sleep, the sound rolling through the darkness without menace, more lullaby than warning. You never heard the shriek of prey or panicked running. No bones crunching, no last cries swallowed by jaws. Predators and prey rested within arm's reach of each other, their breathing slow and synchronized. Scripture says the wolf would dwell with the lamb, and here you saw it, heard it, in the way their exhales mingled in the cooling air. A mouse skittered across a sleeping fox's paw without waking it, its tiny nails ticking against the fur like rain on broad leaves. Sometimes the sounds organized themselves without explanation. A cluster of crickets would suddenly match their rhythm to a bird's call, creating a harmony so precise it couldn't be chance. The river's melody shifted as you walked along it, keeping pace with your own breath. When you hummed, the breeze seemed to carry the tune forward, handing it off to a waiting thrush who wove it seamlessly into its song. The garden's greatest music wasn't in sounds at all, but in the spaces between them. The pause after a woodpecker's tap before the echo returned from a distant trunk. The heartbeat quiet when every creature held still, sensing movement through the trees too soft for footsteps. Then came the unmistakable sound you'd been waiting for, the rustle of someone walking who didn't need to tread lightly because the earth knew him. Branches leaned toward the sound before you could turn your head. The dove in your hands stilled its wings. We've lost this music. Our world shrieks and screeches at us, blares warnings and alarms at frequencies meant to jar us into action. We wake to beeping phones instead of bird call, fall asleep to the rumble of delivery trucks instead of frogs singing the river to sleep. The psalmist said the mountains would sing and the rivers would clap their hands, but our ears have grown too tired to hear it. Here, in this moment before everything changed, you could still hear creation as it was meant to be heard. Not a battle cry or a distress signal, but a conversation, leaf to root, stream to stone, creator to created. The melody was so complete you barely noticed your own breath joining it until the garden grew quiet around you, listening as if waiting for your voice to add its measure to the song. You opened your mouth, unsure what sound would come out, when the tree branches shivered all at once without wind. A single apple fell from a high limb, hitting the earth with a damp thump that sent ripples through everything. The suddenness of it startled a flock of doves into the air, their wings beating like a gasp. For the first time there was a sound that didn't belong. Something heavy, something final. The garden held its breath, waiting to see if you would notice. And in that pause, you heard the first faint hiss of something moving through the grass where nothing should be moving alone. The path through Eden held traces of footsteps that weren't made by human feet. The soil gave slightly under them, staying soft but never wearing down the way dirt paths do now. You didn't find these marks by looking. Your feet found them first, the way they'd sometimes sink half an inch deeper where the ground remembered being pressed down by something heavier than flesh. Genesis says God walked in the garden in the cool of the day. Those walks left quiet signs. Flattened grass stems that straightened slowly after being stepped on, pebbles pressed into the earth just far enough to look natural but not random. Today we strain to feel God's presence. We kneel in cold churches or whisper prayers into silent bedrooms, wondering if anyone hears. But here, walking these paths, you didn't need faith to know he was near. The air tingled where he'd passed, like the warmth left on tree bark after sunlight moves away. Flower petals tilted towards spots where he'd paused, their faces still turned hours later. Once, you found a patch of ground where even the ants walked in slow circles, their antennae trembling as they moved over dirt that must have hummed with leftover holiness. The main path curved westward toward a stand of olive trees. Their trunks grew wide enough that 3 people couldn't have linked hands around them, their bark smooth as skin under your palms. Here the divine footsteps clustered, the soil beneath them springy like fresh bread. This was where God must have stopped often, maybe to watch the sunset paint the river gold or to listen to Adam name the animals. You pressed your bare foot into one particularly deep impression. The earth gave way just enough to cradle your arch, then held firm as if keeping count of every soul that touched it. Small things grew different along the path. Mushrooms formed perfect rings where water had dripped from the edge of a divine robe. Certain flowers only bloomed where shadow fell at the angle of a passing figure. A bee landed on your wrist near one such patch, its legs dusty with pollen that smelled like cinnamon and myrrh, spices nobody had discovered yet. You wondered if Eden grew these things anew each day just for him, the way mothers keep baking their child's favorite bread even after the recipe is memorized. At midday, you found the clearing mentioned in Genesis 3 verse 8, where God walked when the evening breeze began. The grass here lay in radiating lines, all leaning slightly east as if bowing. No wind did that. In the center stood a single flat rock, wide enough to sit on, worn smooth on one side. Not from erosion, from fabric brushing across it countless times. You touched the surface and felt warmth, though the sun hadn't touched this spot for hours. A beetle crawled onto your finger, its shell flashing green. It hesitated, antennae waving, then moved to the rock and scurried along an invisible trail leading off into the bushes. Other creatures treated the path differently than you did. Birds flying overhead would alter their course to pass directly above it, their shadows briefly stitching the divine and human footprints together. A family of rabbits hopped along the edges but never crossed the center line. Once, a young deer stepped fully onto the path, then froze, nostrils flaring at some scent you couldn't detect. It stood trembling for a full minute before bounding away, leaving hoof prints that faded faster than they should have. You began noticing patterns. Every seventh step, the footprints sank deeper. Near certain trees, always figs or almonds, they paused longer, the soil compressed in small circles where someone might have turned to look back. Around these trees the air smelled richest, like crushed herbs and the inside of an old hymnal. You caught yourself stopping at the same spots without meaning to, your body recognizing holy geography before your mind could. Toward evening you reached a place where two streams crossed. The divine path continued straight through the water without pausing. You waded in, expecting to feel stones underfoot, but the stream bed here was smooth clay, molded into gentle ripples that cradled each step. The current parted around your ankles without resistance, the water remembering how to move aside for something greater. Small fish darted close, their gills flaring as they passed through spots where the stream still carried faint whispers of salt and frankincense. At the far bank, the footprints led to an open meadow. Here they wandered in wide, meandering loops, the grass springing back more slowly where each foot had lifted. This must have been where he walked just to walk, with no destination but pleasure. Wild flowers grew thicker here, their colors brighter where petals had brushed against divinity. You knelt to touch a cluster of blue blossoms and felt them pulse faintly under your fingers, their stems swaying toward your palm as if expecting a different hand. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the meadow, but the path remained lit, the grass along it holding the day's light longer than anywhere else. You walked its length one last time, matching your stride to the older footprints. For a few perfect steps, your heels landed exactly where his had. The ground felt different there, not softer but more aware, rising to meet you with the same readiness as when it had last been touched. You thought about how hard we search for God now, through stained glass and scripture in hospital rooms and empty kitchens. How we clutch at vague feelings and call it presence. But here, walking where he walked, presence wasn't something you felt. It was something you stood in. The air, the dirt, the leaves all knew him too well to make a show of it. This was what we lost when Eden closed. Not just a place but the certainty of footsteps we could follow with our eyes closed. As dusk settled, a breeze stirred the grass in long waves. The path's edges blurred as stems straightened toward the last light. You stood still, listening to the evening birds sing the sun down. Then came a sound you hadn't heard before, a whisper of movement through distant trees, too rhythmic for an animal. The leaves shivered in a pattern that wasn't wind. You turned toward it just as the first fireflies blinked on, their lights outlining a figure approaching down the path. The grass didn't bend under it. The air didn't stir. But every hair on your arms stood straight, and in your chest, something tightened like a fist around a ripening fruit. It wasn't fear. It was the opposite, your body recognizing what it was made for before your mind could name it. You took one step forward. The figure paused. Around you the garden held its breath. Then somewhere behind you, much closer than expected, a branch snapped. Not under divine weight. Under something lighter, sneakier, moving when you weren't looking. The moment broke. When you glanced back toward the path, the figure was gone, if it had ever been there. Somewhere beyond the trees an apple fell. It struck the ground with a sound that echoed louder than it should have, and in that echo, you heard the question the serpent would soon ask hanging unspoken in the air. The colors of Eden didn't just catch your eye, they spoke to it. The green of the leaves wasn't simply green. It was the exact shade your pupils relaxed when seeing after hours of squinting at pale screens. Each blade of grass shone with its own light, like sunlight passing through emeralds, but without the harsh glitter that makes you blink. The garden didn't hurt to look at, even at noon when the sun stood directly overhead. Light behaved differently here. It rested on surfaces rather than glaring off them, wrapping around tree trunks and flower petals like water clinging to a dipped finger. Roses grew wild along the riverbanks, their petals holding colors modern roses have forgotten. These blooms didn't fade from crimson to pink at the edges. Each petal stayed saturated from center to tip, as if someone had carved them from solid pigment. They smelled richer too, their fragrance clinging to your clothes hours after you'd walked past. Other flowers grew in colors you couldn't name properly. There was a 5-petaled bloom near the pear trees that shifted between blue and purple depending how the light hit it, like oil on water. When you touched one, your fingers came away dry, the color staying where it belonged. Fruit hung heavy on every branch, their skins flawless. No wormholes, no bird pecks, not even the brown spots that appear on aging bananas. Each piece looked as though it had just finished ripening that second. The grapes clustered so perfectly they seemed polished, their dusty purple sheen reflecting the sky without becoming mirrors. Pomegranates split open on their own when ready, revealing seeds that shone like freshly cut rubies. Their juice didn't stain. It enhanced, temporarily tinting your fingertips the same vibrant red before fading away as your skin absorbed its goodness. The tree of life stood apart without trying to. Its trunk had a faint golden sheen beneath the bark, visible when you stood close enough. The leaves weren't ordinary green, but carried hints of silver along their veins that shimmered when they moved. No fruit hung from its branches yet. The Genesis account suggests Adam and Eve never needed to eat from it before the fall. But the air around it tasted sweeter, like inhaling over a pot of honey without the stickiness. Birds nested in its highest limbs, their feathers taking on an iridescent quality after prolonged contact with the tree's energy. Vegetables grew in shades that would make modern produce look washed out. Carrots came in deep oranges and unexpected violets, their colors uniform from root to stem. Corn kernels gleamed like drops of liquid sunlight, arranged in perfect spirals around each cob. Even the soil boasted colors: rich chocolate browns where you dug for roots, streaks of red clay where water had cut channels, pockets of sand that shone faintly gold when sifted through your fingers. Nothing was dull. Nothing was muted. Morning light transformed the garden into stained glass. Dew droplets on spiderwebs scattered rainbows across every surface without the harshness of prisms. Entire meadows shifted hue as the sun climbed, going from soft lavender at dawn to vibrant greens by midday, then warming to amber as evening approached. The changes happened so gradually you never noticed them occurring, only realizing the shift when comparing distant hills to their morning appearance. Some colors seemed to respond to your presence. A patch of lilies intensified their white when you knelt beside them, their petals brightening as if competing for your attention. Butterfly wings flickered through shades faster than they could physically change, matching the tones of whatever flowers they landed on. Even shadows behaved differently. They never turned objects gray, but instead deepened their colors like varnish on fine wood. Your own shadow didn't darken the grass. It merely cooled it slightly, the blades turning a more saturated green where you blocked the sun. Insects wore colors modern species have lost. Beetles scuttling under logs shimmered with metallic blues and greens that didn't come from light refraction, but from within their very shells. Dragonflies hovered over ponds with wings like colored glass, their transparency somehow containing depth and shimmer at once. Ants marching along tree trunks carried hints of bronze and copper in their exoskeletons, their bodies reflecting the minerals in the untouched soil they worked. As evening fell, colors softened but didn't fade. The deepening light revealed tones hidden during daytime, undertones in flower petals that only appeared at dusk, tree bark that began glowing faintly from within as night approached. The first stars twinkled with unmistakable hues here, their light reaching the garden untarnished by atmosphere. That evening star you strained to see through city smog? Here it burned vivid blue-white, its light crisp enough to cast faint-colored shadows. Water held color differently too. The river ran clear as expected, but the light passing through it painted the stones below in shifting patterns no rainbow could match. Where streams pooled in rocky basins, the water took on the exact shade of turquoise you only see today in alpine lakes, but richer, as if someone had stirred liquid gemstones into it. When you cupped it in your hands, the color adhered to your skin temporarily, your palms glowing faintly blue until the moisture evaporated. These weren't colors designed to impress. They simply existed as things were meant to exist, unconcerned with being noticed. A pebble at your feet contained more intricate bands of mineral deposits than the finest marble in our museums. Fallen leaves revealed vein patterns so precise they looked etched, their autumn tones lingering indefinitely rather than crumbling into brown. Even the air carried color, thin golden veils where pollen drifted, subtle silver streaks where certain light angles sliced through humidity. Then you noticed the single exception. Beyond the tree of life, half hidden by a curtain of vines, stood another tree easily mistaken for part of the lush surroundings until you looked closer. Its fruit shone with an artificial gloss, the red too even, too perfect, like wax models of apples. The leaves didn't shimmer or respond to light. They hung stiffly, their green somehow flat despite being surrounded by Eden's vibrancy. It wasn't ugly. That would have been easier to resist. It was almost right, almost beautiful, but in a way that made your eyes tired if you stared too long. You stepped closer despite yourself. The grass underfoot lost its springiness near the trunk, tamped down by invisible traffic. Small rocks lay overturned at the tree's base, their undersides pale and dry compared to the moist earth they usually nestled in. Everything else in Eden grew effortlessly, but this tree seemed to push its roots down with grim determination, its branches straining upward as if trying to escape its own shadow. Still, the fruit mesmerized. Its surface reflected light harshly rather than diffusing it, throwing bright spots that danced before your eyes when you moved. Looking away didn't help. The afterimage lingered on your retinas, pulsing slightly, insisting you look back. The longer you stood there, the more Eden's other colors seemed to fade toward monochrome, as if this tree absorbed not just water and nutrients from the soil, but chromatic energy from everything around it. A beetle crawled across your foot just then, its shell flashing iridescent green. The shock of real color broke the spell. You stepped back, shaking your head like someone waking from shallow sleep. Around you, the garden's true colors rushed back in. The peach tree's blossoms suddenly vivid against the sky, the river's blues deepening as clouds passed overhead. The beetle flew away, its wings leaving a fleeting trail of prismatic light as it vanished into the bushes. Somewhere beyond those bushes, leaves rustled with more purpose than wind could account for. The sound moved parallel to you, stopping when you stopped. Waiting. You didn't turn to look. Instead, you focused on a spray of white flowers nearby, counting their petals until your vision cleared. When you finally glanced toward the noise, all you saw was a single green vine swaying against a tree trunk, its leaves turned at unnatural angles like fingers curled in invitation. Or warning. Your breath came quicker than Eden's air should allow. The garden seemed to hold its colors more tightly around you, as if sheltering you inside a dome of stained glass. For the first time since arriving, you felt how fragile perfection could be. How one hungry glance, one curious finger stretching toward forbidden fruit, might leach the vibrancy from everything. The flowers at your feet dimmed slightly with each uneven exhale until you made yourself still. Only then, when your pulse calmed, did their petals brighten again, though perhaps not quite as brilliantly as before. The peace in Eden didn't feel like the quiet after a storm passes. It wasn't the exhausted stillness that comes when chaos finally settles. This was peace with no opposite, a world where anxiety hadn't been invented yet. Your muscles didn't tense here waiting for the next disturbance because disturbances didn't exist. Genesis describes it as the rest God took after creation, not because he needed recovery but because everything was complete. You could feel that completeness in every corner of the garden. At dawn, you woke without jerking upright or fumbling for alarms. Your eyes opened naturally to birdsong, your body having slept exactly as long as it required. No grogginess clung to your thoughts. No remnants of troubling dreams lingered at the edges of your mind. The concept of nightmares would have been foreign here. Sleep existed only to restore, never to torment. You stretched on your bed of moss by the stream, feeling each vertebra align without pops or aches, your limbs moving as if oiled at the joints. The morning air slid into your lungs like silk. Breakfast required no preparation. Fruit hung ripe within arm's reach, needing no washing or peeling. You bit into a peach and juice ran down your chin without stickiness, the flesh dissolving against your tongue without effort. No calculations ran through your head about calories or allergies. No thoughts of scarcity made you hoard the extra figs. Every tree bore enough for today, and tomorrow the trees would bear again. Work existed, but without strain. Adam had tended the garden before the fall, but his labor brought no blisters or backaches. You tried it yourself, pulling weeds that came up roots and all with one gentle tug, turning soil that crumbled perfectly between your fingers. Your nails stayed clean. Your brow stayed dry. The earth seemed to anticipate each movement, responding before you completed it. Psalm 128 would later speak of eating the labor of your hands, but here in Eden, labor felt more like breathing, necessary, rhythmic, and utterly effortless. Security didn't require locks or weapons. No creature bared its teeth in warning. No plant jabbed thorns in defense. You napped in sunny clearings without checking for snakes first. At night, you left food uncovered where rodents wandered through without stealing. Even rare events that might startle you elsewhere, a falling branch, a sudden bird taking flight, carried no threat. Your pulse never spiked. Your breath never caught. Fear hadn't yet taught your body its shortcuts. Conflict was unimaginable. No arguments over territory disturbed the animals. No competition for resources twisted the plants against each other. Even the weather moved in harmonious cycles. Gentle rains that always stopped before flooding, sunshine that never scorched. You never scanned the sky for storm clouds or shivered at unexpected chills. The climate obeyed rhythms as reliable as your own heartbeat. Isaiah would later describe perfect peace as a child nursing at its mother's breast. That image held true in Eden. The entire garden nurtured you without demand. Streams paused their flow when you stooped to drink so water wouldn't splash your tunic. Breezes stilled as you passed through tall grass to keep blades from whipping your legs. Fruit trees bent lower branches when they sensed your approach, offering their best produce at exactly the right height. Creation served without servility, anticipating needs before you recognized them yourself. Relationships held no tension. You watched Adam and Eve speak without misunderstandings, their words flowing as clearly as the river between them. No pauses for offense. No careful parsing of tones. When they disagreed, differences resolved like honey dissolving in tea, naturally, sweetly, leaving no bitter residue. Their laughter never covered discomfort because discomfort didn't exist to cover. Their silences were comfortable, their touches always welcome. Shame hadn't yet taught them to cover themselves in each other's presence. The peace extended beyond human interactions. Predators lounged beside prey without hidden agendas. Bees pollinated flowers without competing butterflies trying to push them aside. Even the soil maintained harmony, rich without being greedy, productive without exhausting itself. Minerals circulated perfectly through roots and stems and leaves, never depleting, never accumulating where they didn't belong. The entire ecosystem thrummed with balance so precise modern ecologists can barely imagine it. Your mind settled in ways impossible back home. No to-do lists cluttered your thoughts. No replays of awkward conversations made you cringe. The past carried no regrets here because no mistakes had been made yet. The future prompted no anxiety because no possible tomorrow could disrupt this equilibrium. Scripture calls this shalom. Not just absence of conflict, but completeness in every dimension. You finally understood why the psalmist described lying down in green pastures. It wasn't poetic exaggeration. These pastures literally restored your soul. At twilight, the peace grew tangible. Fireflies blinked in rhythm with your slowing breath. Frogs singing in the marsh softened their voices as your eyelids grew heavy. Stars emerged with muted brilliance, their light gentle enough that you could stare directly at them without squinting. Even darkness here felt friendly, not the ominous cloak that hides dangers in our world, but a comforting blanket that smoothed away the last edges of awareness. You curled on your moss bed, listening to the garden settle around you. Leaves whispered goodnights against each other. The stream hummed a lullaby as it rounded the bend near your resting place. Somewhere nearby, what might have been a lion exhaled slowly, the sound vibrating through the ground and into your bones like a mother's purr comforting her cubs. Just before sleep took you, you glimpsed movement beyond the trees. Not threatening, but distinctly separate from the garden's rhythm. A ripple of darker shadow moved against the trunk of that one particular tree where fruit hung too perfectly. The peace didn't falter, but something in the air grew attentive, like a room when a stranger quietly enters. You meant to watch longer, but exhaustion won, pulling you under with the certainty that morning would come unchanged. The last thing you felt was the moss adjusting beneath your cheek, cushioning you more closely as consciousness faded. The last thing you heard wasn't a sound at all, but the absence of one. The garden holding its breath for half a second before exhaling normally again. Then nothing. Only rest, deep and undisturbed as creation intended. The first thing that struck you was the quiet. Not silence, the garden teemed with life, but the absence of screeches, snarls, or panic. A lion lounged on its side near the creek, tail flicking idly as a lamb nibbled grass inches from its paws. The lamb didn't startle when the lion exhaled. The lion didn't track the lamb's movements with hungry eyes. They simply existed together, two pieces of a puzzle fitting perfectly. Isaiah's vision of predators and prey living in peace wasn't poetic imagery here. It was breakfast. You watched a fox nose through a patch of berries beside a family of rabbits, all more interested in ripe fruit than each other. The rabbits didn't freeze at the fox's approach. The fox didn't tense at their scent. When their tails brushed accidentally, both animals paused, noses twitching in mutual curiosity before resuming their foraging. No hierarchy governed these interactions. No instincts screamed warnings. You half expected this harmony to feel unnatural, but instead, it resonated in your bones like a song you'd forgotten you knew. Birds nested at fox height without fear. Squirrels scampered over sleeping wolves' backs like children climbing harmless hills. Even reptiles moved differently here. A viper slithered past your foot with no defensive coil, its scales shimmering in the sun as it sought shade beneath a log. No creature recognized you as a threat or possible meal. A fawn approached mistaking your fingers for its mother's muzzle, tongue swiping your palm before ambling away. The garden operated on one unshakable truth: no living thing would bring harm to another. Hunting skills lay dormant in the animals' bodies like unused muscles. Eagle talons stayed sheathed though they could have split coconuts. Bear claws slid harmless through river mud instead of flesh. Only their nonviolent functions remained active. Claws for climbing, teeth for cracking nuts, beaks for weaving nests. The purpose of predation hadn't vanished. It had never existed. Creation operated as seamlessly as lungs expanding and contracting, each part sustaining the whole without conflict. The famous lion and lamb prophecy played out in 100 quieter ways. Ducks floated alongside crocodiles, their ducklings skimming over submerged snouts. A toddler, someone's child though you never saw the parents, giggled as a black bear licked fruit juice from its fingers. Even insects cooperated beyond necessity. Ants and grasshoppers shared aphid herds, the ants milking honeydew while grasshoppers stood guard against nothing in particular. Nature wasn't red in tooth and claw here. It was golden in leaf and paw. You discovered this interdependence extended beyond animals. Plants seemingly conspired for mutual benefit. Vines climbed trees without choking them, stopping just shy of blocking sunlight. Flowers bloomed in staggered schedules so pollinators always found work. The whole garden breathed like a single organism, each part attuned to the other's needs. Modern ecosystems survive through competition. Eden thrived through communion. Human presence didn't disturb this balance. Animals sought Adam and Eve's company without domestication's heavy hand. A pair of gray wolves trailed Eve through the orchard like oversized puppies, flopping belly up when she scratched their chins. Songbirds rode Adam's shoulders as he worked, plucking insects from his hair like primate groomers. Genesis mentions Adam naming the creatures, a privilege requiring intimacy. Here you saw it firsthand. A python draping itself around his arm as he murmured a name that made it flick its tongue in apparent delight. No fear. No dominance. Just relationship. Even the serpent moved differently before the fall. It didn't slink or startle when you first noticed it watching from the branches. Its scales gleamed like polished jade, muscles rippling with quiet grace as it descended to eye level. There was no ominous hiss, no primal recoil from your spine. It simply studied you with calm curiosity, forked tongue tasting the air between you as harmless as a butterfly's antenna. Isaiah's image of a child playing safely near a viper's den suddenly made visceral sense. Danger hadn't yet corrupted these relationships. Mealtimes revealed deeper harmony. Deer grazed contentedly beneath fruit-heavy branches, letting windfalls roll to their mouths. Sated lions lazed on sun-warmed rocks, licking fruit pulp from their whiskers. The garden's abundance eliminated need for competition. There were always more figs, more melons, more grain. Watching a leopard chew contentedly on wild grapes drove home how profoundly nature had changed since. This wasn't just peace among animals. This was entire biomes free from the gnawing anxiety of scarcity. Only one interaction gave pause. Near dusk, you spotted the serpent again, not coiled in menace, but stretched along a low branch near the tree of knowledge. Its attention wasn't on you this time, but on something beyond the bushes. The posture wasn't predatory exactly, but intensely focused in a way no other creature had been. Just as you registered this, Eve wandered into view, humming as she reached for a figure. The serpent's head tilted almost imperceptibly. Its tongue flickered faster. You took an instinctive step forward before realizing no danger existed here. Nothing could harm her. Not yet. Nightfall softened interactions further. Owls glided soundlessly past nesting mice. Fireflies drifted unconcerned through spiderwebs whose sticky threads had never trapped living prey. The most startling sight came near midnight. A spotted fawn sleeping nestled against a panther's side, both creatures rising and falling with synchronized breaths. You touched your own chest unconsciously, feeling your heartbeat slow to match theirs. As you settled into your moss bed, Genesis' description of humanity ruling gently over creation finally clicked. This wasn't dominion through force, but stewardship through belonging. Adam hadn't needed whips or cages to walk among lions. The lions recognized his right to be there. Just as the garden knew every creature's place without struggle, every creature recognized humanity's role, not as conquerors but as kin. The serpent found you once more just before sleep. Not threatening but present. It slid onto a rock near your head, watching with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. You held still, remembering this creature wasn't yet the deceiver, just another made thing sharing paradise. When it finally moved away, the grass whispered behind it, but whether in warning or farewell you couldn't tell. Somewhere beyond sight, the first unkindness was taking shape. But for now, the garden slept in perfect trust. Every creature curled safe in the knowledge that nothing here would harm or be harmed. Not tonight. Not yet. In Eden, heaven didn't feel like a separate place. It wasn't somewhere beyond the clouds or after death. It simply existed alongside Earth, woven into the same space like threads in fabric. The air thrummed with this nearness, not in a showy, miraculous way, but as naturally as humidity clings to skin. You didn't question it. You just knew, the same way you know your own shadow follows you without needing to look. Genesis says God walked in the garden. That wasn't poetry here. You could stand in a clearing and sense the exact spot where divine presence had passed minutes before. Not by seeing anything, but because the grass sprang back slower where he'd stepped. Birds perched in certain trees sang with clearer voices. Water pooled in rocky hollows tasted sweeter where it had swirled around his footprints. Heaven wasn't up. It was here. Close enough to brush against if you reached at the right moment. Communication required no ritual. Prayer didn't mean folded hands and closed eyes. Adam and Eve spoke to God the way you'd call to someone in the next room. Casual, expecting an answer. Sometimes he replied from behind a fig tree. Other times his voice came from nowhere and everywhere like summer heat. You witnessed Eve laughing at something he'd said while picking berries, her response as effortless as chatting with a friend over a garden wall. No straining to hear. No wondering if he listened. Connection hummed between creator and created as reliably as a heartbeat. Light behaved differently near these thin places. Some afternoons, sunlight would catch the air at odd angles, revealing what looked like faint golden threads stretching from ground to sky. They vanished when you blinked, but left your skin warm where they'd touched. Evening shadows sometimes held shapes, not full visions but impressions of movement at the corner of your eye. Once, you swear you saw wings reflected in the river for half a second before the water smoothed them away. These weren't frightening glimpses. They felt familiar, like catching your mother's smile across a crowded room. The original Hebrew calls Eden God's garden. Not his temple or throne room, his garden. A place meant for walking, resting, getting dirt under fingernails. When Genesis describes God forming Adam from dust, it paints him kneeling in earth like a potter at his wheel. You could still find that spot if you knew where to look. A patch of red clay slightly indented, always damp no matter how long the sun beat down. This was where heaven touched earth most literally. Divine fingerprints pressed into soil that never quite dried. Modern believers strain for glimpses of the divine. We build cathedrals, chant psalms, fast and weep and beg for visions. But in Eden, encounters happened while peeling fruit or washing dust from your feet. Once, you rounded a bend to find Adam sprawled on his back beneath an oak tree, one arm slung over his eyes, carrying on a lazy conversation with the empty air above him. You froze, embarrassed to interrupt, until you heard the reply inches from your own ear, so close you felt the breath of it stirring your hair. Neither of them found this remarkable. Certain trees seemed rooted in both realms. Their trunks grew straighter, their bark smoother. Fruit hung from their branches with unnatural symmetry, pears shaped like teardrops, apples without blemishes. These trees produced shade that felt cooler despite being no denser. Their leaves never withered. Their roots drank from hidden springs no one could locate. The tree of life was chief among them, but others dotted the landscape like waypoints marking where heaven leaned closest to earth. Birds nested in their branches year-round, eggs always hatching at first thaw regardless of season. Night unveiled deeper connections. Stars shone clearer here, not brighter but nearer, as if you could stretch and graze them with your fingertips. Some constellations pulsed slowly like breathing. Others drifted across the sky in formations Scripture would later call heavenly hosts. Moonlight carried weight, pooling in hollows like liquid silver that stayed cool to the touch until dawn. Even darkness felt sacred, not an absence of light but a different kind of presence. The garden's eastern edge held the thinnest veil. Here mist rose perpetually from a spring-fed pool, swirling into shapes that almost formed words before dissipating. The ground trembled faintly underfoot, not unpleasantly, like standing near a massive creature's resting heartbeat. Adam and Eve avoided this area casually, not out of reverence exactly, but the way children instinctively skirt certain corners of an attic. You stood there once at twilight watching the mist glow faint amber, sensing, knowing, this was where God had entered on that sixth day when his breath first filled human lungs. Where heaven had opened like a door. The contrast with modern spirituality aches. Today we chase mountaintop experiences, desperate for any hint of the divine amid traffic jams and pharmacy receipts. Ancient Israel had the Ark of the Covenant behind thick temple veils. Medieval monks sought visions through self-flagellation. All of us grasping for whispers while Adam simply turned his head and spoke to someone standing right there. You noticed the anomaly near the garden's center. The tree of knowledge stood slightly apart from others, not just physically but spiritually. The air around it didn't shimmer. Birds avoided its branches. Its shadow fell sharper on the ground, like a cutout missing the soft edges everything else possessed. Most tellingly, when you stood near it, that constant sense of divine proximity faded slightly. Not vanished, but muted, like hearing a conversation through a heavy door. But even that tree couldn't sever the connection completely. Not yet. One twilight, while watching fireflies blink around its trunk, you caught movement above it. Not wings exactly, but a disturbance in the air like heat waves over desert sand. The branches shuddered without wind. A single ripe fruit dropped straight down instead of falling sideways, landing with a thud that seemed too loud. For a breathless moment, everything stilled. Then from somewhere nearby, too nearby, came the dry rustle of scales against bark. The veil held, but something had begun pressing against it from the other side. You walked back toward camp slowly, deliberately passing the clay hollow where God had shaped Adam. The indentation glowed faintly in the moonlight, still damp at nearly midnight. You pressed your palm into it, surprised when the clay yielded slightly before springing back. Some connections couldn't be broken so easily. Not then. Not yet. The garden slept peacefully around you, oblivious to the serpent now coiled around that central tree's lowest branch. Overhead, stars pulsed in their constellations. Somewhere east, the misty spring continued exhaling heaven's breath into the night. And beneath it all, like the deepest bass note in a symphony, thrummed the quiet certainty that this proximity wasn't special. It was standard. The way things were meant to be. The way they might be again. The forbidden tree didn't tower over Eden or glow with warning signs. It blended in almost too perfectly, its trunk the same rich brown as the surrounding oaks, its leaves the same vibrant green. Only when you stepped closer did subtle differences emerge. The bark lacked the fine ridges other trees had, too smooth like a wax model of bark rather than the real thing. Leaves rustled with a papery dryness despite the garden's constant humidity. And the fruit looked flawless. Not naturally ripe, but artificially perfect. Each apple identical in shape and shine, their red so uniform it hurt your eyes if you stared too long. Genesis 2 verses 16 to 17 records God's single command. You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. No thunder accompanied these words when you heard them repeated. Just quiet syllables hanging in the air like morning mist. Strange how one unremarkable tree could bear such weight. All around it, Eden continued undisturbed, birds nesting, streams bubbling, animals dozing in dappled sunlight. Only the tree stood watchful, its branches too still in the breeze. Its position in the garden felt deliberate. Not hidden, not prominent, just noticeably central. Other fruit trees grew in clusters, their roots tangling companionably underground. This one rose alone, its roots forming a perfect circle beneath it like an invisible fence. The ground around it stayed oddly bare. No fallen leaves decomposed there. No mushrooms sprouted after rains. Even ants marching along nearby branches would suddenly change course when their path veered too close. The fruit tempted differently than other trees. Regular hunger didn't draw you toward it. Instead, your mind fixated on how the apples reflected sunlight so precisely they seemed to glow from within. How their stems attached at the exact same angle every time. How biting one would likely produce a satisfying crunch no natural fruit could replicate. Modern psychologists might call it the appeal of forbidden perfection. The way a pristine collector's item demands to be touched despite, do not handle signs. Animals treated the tree with polite avoidance. Squirrels scampered past without climbing it. Bees never investigated its blossoms. Once, you watched a deer pause beside it, nostrils flaring at some scent humans couldn't detect before retreating with cautious steps. Even butterflies altered their flight patterns to skirt its perimeter, their wings beating faster until they cleared its shadow. Only flies ever landed on its fruit. Ordinary houseflies that walked in tight circles on the waxy skins before darting away. At night, the tree stood out more clearly. Moonlight didn't soften its edges like other trees. Shadows pooled darker around its base as if the ground swallowed light there. Fireflies never illuminated its branches, though they swarmed nearby figs and pomegranates. Once, walking past at dusk, you swore its trunk pulsed faintly, not like a heartbeat, but like something pressing against thin fabric from the other side. When you blinked, the impression vanished. The prohibition surrounding it felt heavier in practice than speech. Other trees invited picking. Their fruit practically fell into your hands when you neared. This one's apples clung stubbornly to their stems unless deliberately plucked. The air thickened near its branches, making your arm hairs rise when you reached toward them. You pulled back once after fingertips brushed a low-hanging fruit, not from guilt, but because the skin felt strangely warm compared to the garden's balmy air. Adam and Eve mentioned the tree rarely and only in passing. God said not to eat from that one, carried the same tone as, don't touch the hot stove. Not ominous, just factual. They didn't avoid the area completely. You'd seen Eve nap in its shade once, though she curled slightly farther from its trunk than usual. Adam sometimes gathered fallen twigs from nearby trees for kindling, stepping carefully around its root boundary as one might skirt a sleeping lion, not fearing attack, just respecting space. Neither noticed how often the serpent appeared near it. Not coiled menacingly in the branches as artists later depicted, but draped casually along limbs, tongue flicking as if tasting the air for something. It watched more than the other creatures did. Noticed more. Once, when you lingered too long staring at the fruit, you felt its gaze before seeing it. A prickle between your shoulder blades turning you toward where it lay looped around a branch, motionless except for that incessant tongue. Even snakes weren't meant to be threatening here, but your throat dried anyway. The tree's greatest danger wasn't its fruit's poison. Eden knew no poison yet. but the way it divided attention. Other trees nourished. This one provoked thinking, wondering. Its presence whispered questions without words. Why place temptation in paradise? Why create boundaries around perfection? Why would knowing good and evil be forbidden when goodness was all that existed? Every glance at its symmetrical apples planted more uncertainty, each one growing roots behind your ribs. You began catching yourself measuring other trees against it. The peach tree's lopsided fruit suddenly seemed messy. The pear tree's mottled skins looked diseased in comparison. Even the magnificent tree of life paled beside this one's hypnotic uniformity. The serpent noticed your hesitation near it one afternoon, its body tensing slightly as you reached toward but didn't touch a low branch. That evening, you saw Eve pause there too, her fingertips hovering near an apple as her head tilted exactly as yours had. Only in hindsight would you recognize these moments for what they were: rehearsals. Practice for the main performance. The tree stood waiting, not looming but patient, its fruit ripening at some predetermined pace no season controlled. Sometimes its branches shivered when no wind blew. Some nights its roots seemed to dig deeper, sending faint tremors through soil that should have resisted all disturbance. Eden slept on, untroubled, while the one thing that could undo it grew quietly at its heart. Genesis never describes Eve noticing the serpent before it spoke. But you did. You saw it watch her from those branches day after day, learning her patterns. Saw it note how long she lingered near the tree when Adam worked elsewhere. Its eyes tracked her movements with terrible patience, like a dancer counting beats before joining the music. And when it finally slithered down to meet her at eye level one fateful afternoon, you realized, too late, how perfectly the tree's unnatural allure had set the stage. Its fruit shone brighter than ever in that moment. Not with reflected light. With invitation. The serpent didn't slither into Eden like a thief. It simply appeared where it had always been, wrapped around a low branch near the forbidden tree, watching. You wouldn't have noticed it at all if not for the way the leaves rustled without wind. Its scales caught the afternoon light differently than before, reflecting more sharply. Not threatening, just present. Eve came to pick figs from the neighboring tree, humming softly. The serpent waited until she reached for the ripest fruit before speaking. Its voice didn't hiss. Sounded almost human, friendly, curious. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The question hung in the air like fruit swaying on a stem. Simple. Innocent. Wrong. She paused, fingers still outstretched toward the figs. Her brow furrowed slightly. Not in suspicion but confusion. No one had ever questioned God's words before. We may eat fruit from all the trees, she answered slowly, except from this one tree in the middle. God said we must not eat it or touch it or we'll die. The leaves shivered as the serpent shifted position. You won't die, it murmured. The words curled around the tree trunk like morning mist. God knows that when you eat it your eyes will open. You'll be like him, knowing good and evil. Silence pooled between them. The garden sounds continued undisturbed, birds calling, water trickling over stones, but the air itself grew heavier. Eve's hand drifted from the fig branch toward the forbidden tree. She didn't step closer. Not yet. But she didn't walk away either. You'd seen animals approach this tree before only to lose interest quickly. Deer would sniff its trunk and turn away. Birds never landed on its branches. Now Eve studied its fruit as if seeing it properly for the first time. The serpent remained motionless, letting her look. No pushing. No hurry. Just that same quiet voice whenever her gaze lingered too long. Like God, it whispered once. Just once. The fruit looked different from this angle. Not forbidden, just tempting. The skin shone with unnatural smoothness, reflecting Eve's own face back at her like polished metal. She saw her dark eyes widen slightly in its surface. Her fingers twitched at her side. Somewhere beyond the trees, Adam called her name. The sound should have broken the moment. Instead, the serpent simply curled tighter around its branch and waited. Eve didn't answer. Didn't turn. The call came again, farther away this time. Adam must have walked in another direction. Nothing about this felt sinister. That's what startled you most. No ominous music. No chilling winds. Just a woman standing near a tree having a conversation with a creature that, until this moment, had been just another harmless part of paradise. The serpent's arguments sounded reasonable, logical even. If you didn't know the whole story, you might have been convinced yourself. Eve reached out and brushed a leaf near the forbidden fruit. Her fingers didn't tremble. Your own breath caught, remembering God's exact wording about not even touching it. But nothing happened. No lightning struck. No voice boomed from the sky. The leaf felt like any other leaf, waxy and cool against her fingertips. The serpent exhaled softly, almost a chuckle. See. You could pinpoint the exact moment the doubt took root. It wasn't when she first touched the leaf. It wasn't when her fingers closed around the fruit. It came earlier, when the serpent's first question found fertile ground in her mind. Maybe God had overstated the danger. Maybe he'd kept something good from them. Maybe this wasn't about protection at all, but control. The fruit came away easily in her hand as if eager to be picked. She turned it slowly, studying every angle. Up close, the color resembled something between fire and blood, too vivid to look at directly for long. Juice already beaded along the tear in the stem, running down her wrist before she could wipe it away. Around them, the garden continued undisturbed. Butterflies floated past. A rabbit nibbled clover near Eve's bare feet. The serpent watched without blinking as she raised the fruit to her lips. No last-minute warnings. No dramatic pauses. Just a woman, a tree, and a choice that seemed small until the moment teeth broke skin. The crunch echoed louder than it should have. Birds startled from nearby branches in a flurry of wings. Somewhere distant, a lion lifted its head from its paws. Eve chewed slowly, eyes widening at the taste. Sweeter than honey, sharper than wine. Juice dripped from her chin onto the grass below, sinking into the soil too quickly. The serpent uncoiled itself from the branch and slid soundlessly to the ground. It paused once to look back at Eve, then disappeared into the undergrowth without another word. Its job was done. The garden still looked like paradise, but everything had changed. Silence settled over the clearing once more. Eve swallowed, blinked, touched her own face as if checking for changes. Adam called again, much closer this time. She turned toward the sound, fruit still clutched in sticky fingers. For half a heartbeat, nothing seemed different. Then her shoulders slumped slightly and you knew. The whisper had done its work. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, staring at the juice stains with something like wonder or dread. The fruit's core darkened in her palm where the seeds nestled. Perfectly formed. Utterly ordinary. Already beginning to brown at the edges where air touched it. Somewhere beyond the trees, footsteps approached. Eve looked up as Adam pushed through the foliage, smiling at her. His smile faltered when he saw what she held. The question died on his lips when she stretched out her hand toward him, fingers still glistening. The garden held its breath around them. No wind stirred the leaves. No creature made a sound. Even the river seemed to run quieter now, watching as man and woman stood beneath the tree that promised knowledge, bearing fruit that already tasted like loss. Eve's voice, when it came, was softer than the serpent's had been. More hesitant. More human. "Try it," she said, and the last piece of innocence slipped quietly away. The fruit rested heavily in Adam's palm, warmed by Eve's grip. It smelled different from the others, sharper, almost spicy, making his mouth water even as his stomach tightened. He examined the clean bite mark where her teeth had broken the skin, juice still glistening at the edges. The flesh beneath looked ordinary. White. Grainy. Just fruit. But the silence around them felt new and charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Adam hesitated. His fingers knew every tree in Eden. The rough bark of oaks, the smooth skin of figs, the sticky sap of date palms. He could navigate the garden blindfolded, naming each plant by touch. This one tree alone had always remained strange to his hands. Now its fruit weighed down his arm as if growing heavier by the second. Eve's eyes darted between his face and the fruit, dark and unreadable. She wiped her palms on her thighs, leaving damp streaks behind. "It won't hurt you," she said, softer than before. The words didn't echo like God's voice did. They hung between them, fragile. Somewhere nearby, a sparrow landed on a branch, too close, closer than birds usually came to this tree. It cocked its head, watching Adam with black bead eyes. Waiting. The garden itself seemed to hold still, breath caught between obedience and curiosity. Adam raised the fruit slowly. The juice felt tacky on his fingers. He tried to remember God's exact warning. Had he said they would die immediately? Or was death something that would find them slowly, like twilight creeping across the grass? The serpent's words tangled with God's in his memory. Perhaps this was like tasting fire for the first time, painful at first, then broadening your world. The first rationalization settled easily. If Eve had eaten and still stood here unharmed, maybe the warning hadn't been literal. Maybe death meant something else, a change rather than an ending. His thumb rubbed the fruit's smooth skin. He'd never doubted God's words before because there had been nothing to doubt. Now the uncertainty spread through him like ink in water. Eve shifted her weight from foot to foot. "It tastes better than the others," she offered when his pause stretched too long. Her voice had a new quality, not pleading exactly but insistent in a way he didn't recognize. It reminded him of how she sounded when describing dreams upon waking, that urgency to share before the memory faded. Adam met her gaze. The whites around her irises looked brighter, her pupils wider. Had they always been like that? He couldn't recall. It unsettled him, this sudden attention to details that never mattered before. His free hand reached up unconsciously to touch his own face, checking for changes. The sparrow startled and flew off in a rush of wings. Its departure broke the stillness, sending a ripple through the nearby bushes. For the first time in Eden's history, Adam hesitated before answering an unspoken question. Every other choice had been effortless. Which fruit to pick, where to walk, when to rest. This hesitation itself was new. Heavy. Eve reached out and steadied his wrist with both hands, guiding the fruit toward his mouth. Her fingers felt colder than they should have. "You won't be alone," she whispered. The words carried the faintest tremor. Adam exhaled slowly through his nose. Trust had always come easily here. He trusted the trees to bear fruit, the stream to run clear, the lion to share the shade. Above all, he'd trusted the one who walked with them in the cool of the day. But Eve's hands trembled against his skin, and doubt crept in like fog. If God had withheld this knowledge, what else might he keep from them? The fruit touched his lips. Cool at first, then warming quickly against his skin. He kept eye contact with Eve as he bit down. The flesh gave way with a crisp snap, louder than expected in the waiting silence. Juice flooded his tongue, cloyingly sweet at first, then turning tannic, almost bitter at the back of his throat. As he chewed, Eve's grip tightened slightly. She watched his face avidly, searching. For what? Fear, wonder, recognition. The flavors shifted again, the aftertaste metallic, like licking a wound. His jaw slowed. Something was... He swallowed. Wrong. The garden sounds rushed back in all at once. Bird song, rustling leaves, the distant river. But sharper now, discordant where before they'd harmonized. The light seemed brighter too, glaring off every surface. Adam blinked rapidly against the assault on his senses. His skin prickled as if the air itself had changed temperature. Eve released his wrist. They stared at each other in the dappled shade, neither speaking. The fruit's core dangled from Adam's fingers, seeds exposed to the open air for the first time. They looked ordinary, small, insignificant. A gust of wind stirred the trees, sending leaves skittering across the ground. Neither flinched when one brushed their bare legs. They didn't flinch at all. That was the difference. Before, the garden had known them, moved with them, anticipated their steps. Now the leaf scraped Adam's ankle like any other dry leaf would. He dropped the core absently. It hit the ground with a thud neither of them acknowledged. Eve rubbed her palms together in slow circles, though no juice remained on them. The serpent was nowhere to be seen, but its absence felt more noticeable than its presence had been. As if it had orchestrated this moment precisely to vanish before the consequences arrived. Adam crouched to pick up the fallen core but froze halfway down. His knees ached suddenly in a way they never had before. Not pain exactly, but the warning of it. Muscles protesting a movement they'd performed effortlessly for years. He straightened with effort, leaving the core where it lay. A butterfly landed on Eve's shoulder. She turned her head to look at it, too quickly this time. It took flight before her hair settled back into place. That too was new, the jerky motion, the creature's alarm. Everything in Eden had once moved together. Now each action sent ripples of disruption through the world around them. Adam reached for Eve's hand. Their palms met damply, fingers intertwining. They stood like that beneath the forbidden tree, gripping each other too tightly, listening to the garden sounds that no longer bent to accommodate them. The knowledge settled over them both at once, not as revelation but as simple, unavoidable fact. They were alone now in a way they'd never been before. The choice couldn't be unmade. Somewhere east of them, unseen in the deepening shadows, the angel's sword caught the last of the sunlight and flashed once. A brief, distant warning. The air changed first. It wasn't the gradual cooling of evening. This shift came sudden, like stepping from sunlight into shade. Goosebumps pricked Adam's arms though the temperature hadn't dropped. Eve exhaled and watched her breath curl visibly before her face, though it wasn't cold enough for mist. The garden sounds grew distant, muffled, as if someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the world. Their skin knew before their minds did. Eve scratched absently at her forearm, leaving pink streaks. Adam rubbed his palms against his thighs like they itched. Neither had ever felt discomfort in their flesh before. Now their bodies prickled all over, not pain but awareness. The realization arrived slowly, like water seeping through cloth. They were naked. Genesis 3 verse 7 says their eyes were opened. Not just to see differently but to feel it. The breeze that had once been comforting now raised hairs on their necks. Sunlight filtering through leaves no longer warmed them. It highlighted every pore, every blemish, every vulnerable patch of skin. Eve crossed her arms over her chest without thinking. Adam turned slightly away, one hand moving to cover himself. These gestures felt foreign, learned without teaching. Around them the garden transformed. Leaves that had once bent away from their path now brushed against them with rough edges. Stones scraped their bare feet where before the earth had softened underfoot. A vine snagged Eve's ankle as she stepped back, leaving the faintest red line. Nature no longer accommodated them. They worked quickly, silent except for sharp inhales when fig leaves tore in their trembling hands. The broad green fronds had always felt waxy and smooth. Now their edges sliced paper-thin cuts as Adam yanked them from branches. Eve tried weaving stems together, but her fingers slipped on the sticky sap that had never bothered her before. The more they fumbled, the more their breathing shallowed. Panic wasn't something they'd experienced until now. It tasted metallic at the back of their throats. Something was watching. Neither said it, but both sensed it, eyes on their backs as they crouched in the undergrowth. Not God's familiar presence, not the curious gazes of animals. Something colder. The awareness made their makeshift coverings feel thinner. Eve tied a second layer of leaves around her waist with shaky fingers. The first set was already wilting in her sweat. Every sound startled them now. A rustle in the bushes sent Adam spinning around, scattering half his gathered leaves. A bird's sudden call made Eve gasp. Before, these noises had been part of Eden's music. Now each one carried potential threat. Their hearts beat too fast, their bodies reacting to dangers that didn't yet exist. They tried hiding their work when God's footsteps sounded in the distance. The crunch of foliage under divine weight had always brought them running before. Now Adam froze mid-motion, a half-formed loincloth dangling from his hands. Eve ducked behind a tree, though its trunk was too narrow to conceal her. The footsteps paused. They waited. The wind carried the scent of ripe figs toward them, now tinged with something sour like ferment. Time stretched thin. A bead of sweat ran down Adam's temple. He'd never perspired before. The sensation was strangely humiliating, proof his body could betray him. Eve's stomach growled loudly, another new indignity. Hunger hadn't existed here until this moment. Their physical needs had always been met before they could form. Now empty space yawned inside them, both hollow and insistent. The tree of knowledge loomed behind them, suddenly ugly in its isolation. Birds no longer perched in its branches. Ants avoided its trunk. The once tempting fruit now looked gaudy and overripe where it had torn from the stem. Shiny pulp clung to the bark where Eve had taken the first bite. Neither could look at it directly. Eve reached for Adam's hand. Their palms stuck together slightly where sweat gathered. Another intimacy that now felt like exposure. His fingers tightened around hers too hard, but she didn't pull away. The contact grounded them as the world tilted sideways. Shadows lengthened unnaturally fast. What had been golden afternoon light turned amber, then ruddy as if the sun itself blushed for them. The temperature dropped in fits and starts. A chill breeze, then warmth, then chill again. Their bodies couldn't adjust. Eve shivered despite the heat radiating from Adam's grip. For the first time they noticed they were dirty. Dust clung to Eve's ankles where she'd knelt. Adam's nails were crusted with soil from grasping at the earth. Before, Eden's dust had been clean. Now it smeared gray across their skin. Eve rubbed at a mark on her calf but only spread it further. Their makeshift clothing sagged as the leaves lost moisture. Stems that had been pliable an hour ago now snapped brittle in their fingers. Sap dried into itchy patches on their thighs. Every adjustment made the coverings looser, more precarious. The more they tried to fix them, the more exposed they became. When God's voice finally called, "Where are you?" it didn't boom from the heavens as they expected. It came quietly from just beyond the next row of trees. A father's question to hiding children. The tone hadn't changed, but they heard it differently now. Every syllable sharpened to a point. They looked at each other, seeing their own terror mirrored. Eve's lips moved soundlessly. Adam swallowed with effort, his throat suddenly tight. Their breath came in short bursts they couldn't control. The knowledge settled over them like dust. They weren't just naked. They were seen. Something broke in that moment, deeper than the crunch of teeth through fruit flesh. Not just their innocence, but their certainty. The awareness of loss arrived fully formed, not just of paradise but of something even more precious. They'd never again walk unself-consciously in God's presence. Never stand bare and unashamed in the garden's clearing. Never know the simple peace of being truly, completely known. Adam squeezed Eve's hand once more, too hard again, an apology and accusation in one gesture, before stepping forward to answer. His voice cracked on the first syllable, another human fragility they'd never experienced before. Behind them, the first fig leaf detached from Eve's waistband and fluttered to the ground. Neither turned to watch it fall. The path out of Eden felt different underfoot. Not just the slope, though that was new too, uneven in ways the garden never had been, but the texture. The soil didn't spring back when Adam took his first steps eastward. It gave way reluctantly, packing down under his weight with the first footprints Eden couldn't erase. Eve followed behind him, her smaller steps falling where his had flattened the grass. Neither spoke. The air smelled strange here, sharp with minerals and something bitter they didn't have a name for yet. Behind them, the garden still exhaled its evening fragrance. Ripe figs, damp moss, the honeyed scent of flowers opening to the dusk. The contrast made Eve pause mid-step. She turned back without meaning to, drawn by the warmth still radiating from between those trees. The light there glowed golden through the leaves, softer than the harsh sun beating down on this open slope. A bird called from inside the canopy, its voice sweeter than any sound they'd heard since stepping beyond the gates. Adam kept walking, but slower now, as if something pulled at his shoulders. His hands flexed at his sides, empty. He'd carried tools back home, woven baskets, digging sticks smoothed by use. Now he had nothing but the rough tunic of sown leaves already fraying at his waist. The muscles in his back stood out strangely where the light hit them. Eve realized with a start that he looked thinner than he had that morning. Neither had eaten since the fruit. Genesis says God stationed cherubim east of the garden with a flaming sword. You'd expect them to be terrifying, radiating holy fire, wings stretching across the horizon. But when Eve glanced back one last time, what caught her eye wasn't the angels. It was the way Eden's shadows lengthened toward them across the threshold, as if reaching for their ankles. The sword's flames didn't roar. They flickered quietly, turning slowly in midair like a living thing deciding where to strike. Behind them, between the trees, something moved, perhaps just wind in the branches. Perhaps more. Adam cleared his throat. The sound rasped oddly dry. Eve startled and turned away from the garden so quickly her makeshift tunic snagged on a thorn bush. The first pain. A thin red line appeared on her thigh where the branch had caught her. They looked at it together, fascinated and sickened. Blood beaded slowly along the scratch, brighter than any fruit they'd ever seen. Eve touched it with one finger, then stared at the crimson smear on her skin. Ahead of them stretched land nothing like Eden's carefully curated slopes. Wild grasses grew in uneven clumps, some stalks brown at the tips. Rocks jutted from the soil where no one had cleared them away. The ground rose and fell unpredictably, revealing glimpses of a dusty valley below where no river ran. The colors seemed washed out compared to the garden's saturated greens and golds, as if someone had taken Eden's palette and diluted it with water. The sun felt hotter here. Unfiltered by Eden's canopy, it burned Adam's shoulders pink within hours. Sweat pooled at the small of Eve's back, itching where it trickled down. Neither had experienced true thirst before. Now their tongues stuck to the roofs of their mouths as they walked. Eve kept glancing at Adam's face, searching for reassurance, but his expression had grown unfamiliar. Jaw tight, eyes focused somewhere distant. When night fell, they huddled together under an outcropping of rock. Eden's nights had been mild, the air circulating gently to maintain perfect comfort. Here the temperature plummeted after sunset. Eve trembled against Adam despite their shared warmth. Sounds drifted through the darkness, rustling in the bushes, the screech of some creature they couldn't see. At least in Eden they'd known every noise by heart. Adam slept fitfully, jerking awake at unfamiliar sounds. Eve lay staring at the stars. So much harder to see here without Eden's pristine air. The moon cast sharp shadows that moved unnaturally as clouds passed. Sometimes she thought she saw darker shapes moving between them. Neither had ever been afraid of the dark before. Morning brought worse discoveries. Without Eden's perpetual abundance, they had to search for breakfast. The first berry bush they found bore fruit wrinkled and sour. Eve spat hers out, the tartness making her eyes water. Adam chewed his slowly, forcing it down with visible effort. His stomach growled audibly afterward, another new indignity. Several attempts later, they found edible greens growing near a stagnant-looking pond. The leaves toughened between their teeth, nothing like the tender shoots from Eden's cultivated patches. By midday, Eve's bare feet were scraped raw from the rocky ground. Adam fashioned sandals from broad leaves and vine, but they unraveled within hours. As he retied them for the third time, Eve noticed something moving along the horizon, dark shapes rippling across the distant hills. Too large to be animals. Too organized to be weather. She touched Adam's arm, pointing silently. They watched together as the figures resolved into something resembling upright forms, moving with purpose toward some destination they couldn't see. The realization hit them simultaneously. Others existed beyond the garden. Not animals. Not God. Creatures like them, but different. Neither said it aloud, but both shoulders tensed. Eden had only ever belonged to them. Here nothing would. That night, Eve dreamed of Eden's gates. In the dream, she stood before them watching the cherubim's sword turn its endless circles. Someone, something, stood just inside the garden's border, features blurred by flame and shadow. It held out a fruit in one hand, perfectly ripe and unblemished. The other hand pointed east toward where she and Adam now wandered. She woke with a gasp to find Adam already sitting up, staring back the way they'd come. They never spoke about trying to return. Some knowledge needed no words. The garden had been home when they belonged there. Now it watched them go with the same indifferent beauty as the stars overhead. The sword still turned. The trees still grew. Life continued behind the gates exactly as it always had. Only now it continued without them. The road ahead sloped downward into valleys they couldn't yet see. Behind them, Eden's light faded gradually with each westward step. Neither looked back again. There was no anger in their silence, no bitterness. Just the simple exhaustion of those who have lost something irreplaceable and must now learn to bear its absence. The moon rose higher, washing the landscape in silver. Somewhere ahead, animal eyes reflected the light back at them, dozens of tiny sparks floating in the dark. Adam took Eve's hand as they walked toward them. Her fingers felt cold and too thin in his grip, yet somehow more real than anything had before. Home wasn't behind them anymore. The realization settled like dust over everything. What lay ahead wasn't home either. Not yet, perhaps not ever. But they walked toward it anyway because walking away was no longer an option. You carry Eden with you like a breath held too long, the memory sweet, aching, impossible to release. It surfaces at odd moments. When morning light slants through trees just so, when ripe fruit bursts on your tongue with unexpected sweetness, when you catch the scent of soil after first rain. These fragments feel familiar deep in your bones, though you can't say why. Theologians call it Sehnsucht, that inconsolable longing for a home we've never visited. But you've been there. You remember. The world outside the garden never quite matches up. Colors appear faded compared to Eden's brilliance. Air carries weights it didn't before. Exhaust, dust, the tang of decay. Even beautiful things now hold an edge of sorrow. Roses have thorns, honey attracts stinging insects, clear streams eventually run dry. You find yourself touching surfaces expecting them to respond as Eden's did. The way tree bark yielded slightly under your fingers, how moss cushioned your steps before you could sink in. But this ground stays stubbornly hard beneath your feet. Adam and Eve passed the memory down through generations like a hidden stain on the family tapestry. Cain built altars of rough stones, arranging them in patterns that almost resembled Eden's pathways. Abel selected his finest lambs, searching for that lost scent of the garden's obedient flocks. Their descendants planted gardens within gardens, trying to recreate what they'd never seen but somehow knew existed. We still do it today, tending backyard plots, preserving wilderness, painting landscapes with colors just a shade brighter than reality, all trying to recapture something we've forgotten how to name. Scripture preserves echoes in unlikely places. The tabernacle's design mirrored Eden's layout. Golden lampstand as the tree of life, embroidered curtains recalling the garden's flora. The Holy of Holies where God's presence dwelled like he once walked between the trees. Solomon's temple included carved pomegranates and lilies, motifs from a place the king himself had never seen. Prophets described future redemption in garden terms. Desert blooms, mountains dripping wine, wolf and lamb lying down together. Each image a shattered piece of the original held up to the light at different angles. Modern life crowds out the echoes but can't silence them completely. They surface when you hold a newborn and smell that inexplicable sweetness babies carry like milk in morning mist. They linger in moments of unexpected harmony, when strangers work together seamlessly during disasters, when old enemies clasp hands in forgiveness, when communities gather under shade trees to share food and stories. These glimpses don't last. But for a heartbeat, the world feels right in ways you can't explain, only mourn when they fade. Literature aches with the loss. Milton's Paradise Lost spends more verses describing Eden's destruction than its glory. Steinbeck's East of Eden characters wander spiritual wastelands, always looking back. Even secular stories borrow the framework. Utopian societies that crumble, heroes searching for mythical realms, post-apocalyptic narratives where characters rebuild from rubble. We retell the story because we're still living it. Still carrying that quiet horror of having tasted perfection and lost it. The longing shapes theology too. Augustine wrote of humanity as fallen castles, once glorious, now ruins whispering of former splendor. Lewis imagined our desires as signposts pointing beyond this world. Contemporary pastors speak of already but not yet redemption, that tension between Eden's memory and Revelation's promise. All trying to articulate why we feel like exiles in our own skin. You experience it most acutely in dreams. Not literal visions of the garden but sensations, weightlessness, safety, being fully known yet unashamed. You wake grasping at fragments. The scent of petals, the sound of water, the certainty that you belong somewhere. Daylight erases the details but leaves the imprint, like grass pressed in a book. Oddly, pain sharpens the echo. When illness makes your body ache for the first time, you remember it didn't always feel this way. When betrayal strips your trust bare, you recall relationships without hidden motives. Even nature's cruelty, storms, droughts, predators, feels wrong because somewhere deeper than memory, You know the world wasn't meant to work like this. Yet the echo persists. Not to torment but to orient. Like a talisman against despair, it whispers that brokenness isn't ultimate. The ache itself becomes proof. If we can long for Eden so deeply, might that not suggest its reality? C.S. Lewis argued that hunger implies the existence of food. Our inconsolable yearning for paradise may be the surest evidence it once existed. And could again. You keep unexpected reminders. A scrap of silk that feels almost like Eden's leaves against your skin. A song whose melody almost mirrors the garden's birds. Brief moments when light hits water at a certain angle and for a second you're back there, not remembering but present. They fade faster now, these flashes. But you've learned to pay attention when they come. At night, when the world grows quietest, the echo sometimes swells. Lying awake, you imagine hearing distant birdsong through your window. Not the daytime chatter of city sparrows, but liquid notes that don't belong to any bird you've ever seen. The scent of something blooming drifts in, though you've planted no flowers. Your skin tingles as if brushed by familiar hands. These may be dreams, or memory, or hope manifesting. Perhaps that's the echo's purpose. Not just to remind us what was lost, but to sustain us toward what's coming. Every beautiful thing in this world is either a relic of Eden or a herald of the new creation. The same God who walked in the garden still walks among us, planting whispers of home in the soil of our hearts. When Moses asked his name, the answer came, I am. Present tense. Still here. Even now. So you cradle the echo gently, this bruised knowing between your ribs. You let it hurt when it must. You let it comfort when it can. And on the hardest days, when the world feels particularly broken, you press your palm to your chest and feel it answering. A quiet, stubborn pulse keeping time with a song you barely remember but somehow still know by heart. The echo won't let you forget. Not completely. No matter how far east of Eden you wander. The memory of Eden isn't just history. It's medicine for the modern soul. When the noise of today's world becomes too much, we can close our eyes and return to that first garden. Not as escape but as reset. The peace you felt there wasn't accidental. It was woven into creation's fabric, and traces remain for those who know how to look. Think of how your body relaxes near water, by a calm lake or gentle stream. That's Eden's echo. The way sunlight through leaves makes you pause mid-step. The scent of rain on earth that stops your hurried thoughts. These moments aren't coincidental. They're reminders that our souls remember a home our feet have never walked. Scripture hints at this in Revelation 22, describing the river of life flowing clear as crystal from God's throne. The imagery isn't new. It's recalling what once was. Modern life bombards us with chaos. Screens shout bad news. Schedules demand more than we can give. Relationships fracture under pressures Eden never knew. Yet Isaiah promises God will comfort all our waste places, making our wilderness like Eden. Notice the comparison. Not Eden replaced, but our broken spaces transformed to resemble what they were meant to be. The difference matters. It means our longing isn't pointless. It's preparation. Practical applications emerge when we treat Eden's memory as therapeutic. Try this tonight. Before sleep, reconstruct the garden in your mind. Not the events, just the setting. The weight of perfect fruit in your hand. The way the air moved between trees. Researchers find such guided imagery lowers stress hormones. The Bible goes further, calling meditation on Scripture the refreshing of our souls. Combine both. Picture Eden while holding God's promises. The combination anchors in ways generic relaxation techniques can't. Gardens still heal today. Hospitals build healing gardens because studies show patients recover faster when surrounded by living plants. Children with behavioral disorders calm in green spaces when classrooms overwhelm them. Home gardeners often describe their work as therapy without knowing why. We're drawn to creation because we were created for it. The original garden's blueprint persists in our DNA. Tending even a windowsill herb garden connects us to that primal caretaking role Adam once knew. Sound grounds us too. Eden's birdsong lacked the frantic tones of modern city birds. You can recreate aspects by listening to nature recordings, not just background noise but intentional focus. Pay attention to individual elements. The rhythm of crickets, the cadence of a distant dove. Researchers find these natural patterns regulate our nervous systems better than white noise or silence. The psalmist wrote of creation declaring God's handiwork. Sometimes healing begins by remembering how to listen. Fruit still carries echoes of Eden's perfection. Next time you eat something ripe, a peach, a berry, pause first. Note its color, its scent. Taste slowly. The act forces presence, something Eden embodied perfectly. Our rushed meals and distracted snacks can't satisfy because we're made for more. The garden's meals were events, not just nourishment but communion. Modern nutrition focuses solely on chemical components. Scripture reminds us food is also gift. Certain passages anchor us when anxiety spikes. Revelation's tree of life bears 12 kinds of fruit, a direct callback to Eden's abundance. Jeremiah describes God's people as a well-watered garden in drought. Ezekiel's vision includes trees whose leaves are for healing. These aren't just metaphors. They're memories repurposed as promises. Keep them bookmarked, not just in your Bible but in your mind. When the world feels unstable, these verses rebuild the foundations. Art helps bridge the gap. Medieval monks illuminated manuscripts with Eden's flora and fauna. Renaissance painters depicted paradise with luminous colors science hadn't yet named. Modern creators continue the tradition. Filmmakers capturing unspoiled landscapes, composers mimicking birdsong in symphonies, poets wrestling with exile and return. Their work succeeds when it makes us ache because they've brushed against something true. Surround yourself with these glimpses. They're not substitutes but signposts. Community reflects Eden's harmony imperfectly but importantly. Adam and Eve knew no loneliness until exile. Today, healthy relationships, where we're fully known yet fully accepted, offer shadows of that original connection. Notice when conversations flow effortlessly, when shared laughter lightens burdens, when sitting together requires no words. These moments matter because isolation wasn't part of the original design. The church at its best recreates Eden's unity across divisions the world can't bridge. Science confirms nature's benefits while missing their source. Studies show forests lower blood pressure, but Scripture knew it first. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Research proves gardening fights depression, but Adam discovered it while tending Genesis's soil. Modern wellness trends rediscover ancient truths while stripping them of context. We can reclaim that context. When studies verify nature's healing power, hear in them Genesis's whisper. It was very good. Eden's ultimate comfort isn't nostalgia, it's trajectory. Scripture ends with a garden city combining the best of both worlds. The paradise we lost wasn't the final plan, just the first draft. When Revelation promises no more tears, it's completing what Genesis began. This perspective transforms our grief over Eden from regret to anticipation. The garden isn't just behind us. It's ahead. Tonight try this. Step outside if you can, or simply open a window. Breathe deeply, not the perfumed air of Eden but the real air of this world God still sustains. Listen for crickets or wind or distant traffic. Notice how even fallen creation carries rhythms worth tuning into. The same God who walked in the cool of the garden still walks with us through whatever wilderness we face. Peace isn't lost, just misplaced and remade. So when the memories come, that sudden scent of blossoms, that slant of golden light, that fleeting feeling of rightness, don't dismiss them as imagination. They're invitations, reminders that Eden was never just a place. It's a relationship. And relationships, even bruised ones, can be restored. The garden's gates may be closed, but its gardener still walks with us in the cool of every evening, whispering that exile isn't forever. Hold that promise close. Let it anchor you. And take comfort, deep, abiding comfort, in knowing that all our longing is leading us home. The story doesn't end with the angel's sword flashing at Eden's gate. That wasn't the final word. Scripture tells us this clearly. The same book that begins with a garden ends with a city infused with garden's essence. Revelation paints the picture. No more tears, no more death or mourning or pain. The former things will pass away. This isn't wishful thinking. Its promise woven through the Bible like golden thread, from the prophet's visions to Jesus' teachings about the kingdom. When nights grow long and the world feels particularly broken, remember this. Eden was the first draft, not the masterpiece. The garden's beauty wasn't erased. It was preserved in promise. Isaiah describes deserts blooming like crocuses. Ezekiel sees the temple with a river flowing from it, lined by trees whose leaves bring healing. These images aren't metaphor. They're previews. Revelation 22 describes the new creation with startling clarity. The tree of life stands center stage again, but now bearing 12 kinds of fruit, one for each month. Its leaves are for the healing of nations. The river of life runs crystal clear, unpolluted by time or sin. Best of all, God Himself dwells there with His people. No more separation. No more veils. The daily walks in Eden's cool will become eternal communion. This future transforms how we view our present exile. The pains of this world, the loneliness, the sickness, the fractured relationships, aren't permanent conditions. They're birth pangs. Paul writes that creation groans as in childbirth. The ache isn't meaningless. It's anticipation. Notice how Revelation's city incorporates Eden's best elements while surpassing them. The garden had gold and precious stones hidden in riverbeds. The New Jerusalem is built from them. Eden's trees bore fruit seasonally. The celestial ones produce monthly. The original garden hosted God's presence intermittently. The final city becomes His permanent dwelling. Every good thing we remember about Eden isn't lost. It's being redeemed, amplified, made unbreakable. This hope doesn't erase current suffering, but it reframes it. The eastward journey away from Eden's gates becomes the westward road toward something greater. The exile's bitterness sweetens when we know it's leading us home by another path. Scripture never dismisses our grief over Eden's loss. God Himself clothes Adam and Eve before sending them out, but it won't let us camp there either. Practical hope emerges when we let this future shape our present. When insomnia strikes tonight, try this. Picture not just Eden's past peace but Revelation's promised rest. Imagine waking in a world where weariness doesn't exist, where bodies don't ache, where minds don't race with unanswered questions. The Bible calls this setting our minds on things above. Not escapism, reorientation. The tree of life's restoration carries special comfort. Its 12 fruits suggest perpetual abundance. No more scarcity, no seasonal deprivation. The healing leaves imply complete wellness. Physical, emotional, relational. The image combines sustenance and medicine in one enduring source. Sleep comes easier when we remember this awaits us, not as metaphor but as dwelling place. Jesus' words take on new dimension in this light. When He promises to prepare a place for us, He's not describing celestial hotel rooms. He's architecting the fulfilled Eden. His resurrection body, able to eat fish yet walk through walls, hints at what ours will become. The same hands that planted the first garden are crafting the eternal one. Tonight, let this truth settle over you. Every beautiful thing you've ever experienced, every sunset that took your breath away, every moment of perfect peace, every glimpse of unspoiled creation, wasn't the main event. It was the trailer, the preview, the appetizer. The best is yet to come. The same scriptures that recount Eden's lost brim with homecoming visions. Micah promises we'll sit under our own vine and fig tree with none to make us afraid. Amos envisions gardens sprouting where ruins once stood. Joel describes mountains dripping sweet wine. These prophets weren't fantasizing. They were documenting coming realities glimpsed through God's lens. Humanity's story follows this arc, from garden to garden city. From walking with God in Eden to dwelling with Him in the New Jerusalem. The path between includes thorns and sweat and death. Jesus didn't exempt Himself from that journey, but it leads somewhere. The cross proves how seriously God takes restoration. As you prepare for sleep tonight, consider this symmetry. The same Bible that opens with, "In the beginning," closes with, "Behold, I am making all things new." Genesis and Revelation form bookends around history, with the cross as the turning point. Your life exists somewhere between those promises, after Eden's loss but before the full restoration. This position isn't accidental. God could have snapped his fingers instantly after the fall. He chose process instead. Centuries of prophets, the incarnation, the slow spread of the gospel. Why? Perhaps because the waiting cultivates something in us. Like a child anticipating Christmas morning, the longing itself shapes our capacity for joy. So when sadness over Eden's loss surfaces tonight, when life's brokenness feels overwhelming, don't suppress it. Trace that ache forward to its fulfillment. The grief over paradise lost finds solace in paradise restored. The same God who expelled humanity from the garden sent his Son to reopen the way. Tonight's simple ritual might help. Hold something from creation. A leaf, a stone, a flower. Study its intricacies while remembering it's a prototype of something grander. The new creation won't discard these designs. It will perfect them. Let that thought quiet your mind as you settle under blankets. Sleep becomes different when framed this way. Not just rest from today's exhaustion, but rehearsal for eternal rest. Each night's surrender to unconsciousness mirrors the final surrender of all broken things to redemption. We sleep in hope because we serve a God who specializes in resurrections. The Bible's last chapter contains no more night, not because darkness is erased, but because God's glory illuminates everything. But tonight, as you lie in darkness, let it serve its temporary purpose. Let shadows remind you that morning is coming. Let silence whisper of the day when every question finds its answer. Close your eyes now, holding loosely to Eden's memory but tightly to Revelation's promise. The same God who walked with Adam in the garden walks with you now. The same voice that called to them in their shame calls you beloved. The same hand that planted the first trees is preparing the last. Rest follows naturally when we remember. Exile isn't forever. The gate may be closed, but the road home stretches clearly before us. And at its end, someone waits with scars on his hands and a tree full of fruit just up ahead. Sleep in that assurance tonight. The story ends where it began, only better. Much better. And it ends soon. But for now, rest. Tomorrow's journey continues, but morning by morning, step by step, we're walking home. Now close your eyes. Breathe deep. And let hope carry you into peaceful sleep. As you drift off into sleep tonight, let Eden's peace wrap around you like a soft blanket. Picture the garden's gentle light behind your closed eyelids, the dappled shade of fruit trees, the quiet streams, the air that always carried just the right warmth. Breathe deep and remember, the night won't last forever. Morning is coming. A morning brighter than Eden's first dawn. Until then, rest in this assurance. The same hands that planted that garden are still at work, remaking all things new. Good night, friend. May your sleep be deep, your dreams sweet, and your heart full of the coming joy. God bless you.